I've been talking a lot about fairy tales this month, and today I want to talk about the new Disney movie Disenchanted. Disenchanted is the sequel to Enchanted, which is sort of a parody about a Disney princess type character from a magical land called Andalasia, who ends up in the real world, present day, in New York City, and ends up having this adventure and falling in love, even though it doesn't go quite the way that you would expect based on the idea of it being a fairy tale. Disenchanted picks up several years later and continues the story. Basically, the idea is that in Andalasia, when you get your happily ever after, that's it. The rest of your life will be blissfully perfect. But in the real world, that's not the case. And so, with, just everyday life continuing to be imperfect and difficulties in the family dynamic with the stepdaughter growing up to be a teenager and Giselle, the protagonist, not really knowing how to relate to her. The family moving from New York City to the suburbs, which Giselle is very happy about, but her stepdaughter Morgan is definitely not. It ends up seeming like their happily ever after is kind of falling apart, and so Giselle makes a wish that kind of turns everything upside down. I thought that it was a pretty interesting movie. Obviously, I'm not a child or a parent of young children, so I'm not really the target audience, but I did think that it was pretty entertaining. I thought that some of the things that they did were a little bit cliche, or like I've seen them done before and maybe in some cases done better. And I didn't think that any of the music was particularly memorable, but it was still an enjoyable experience watching it. I did have one kind of point of irritation that definitely is me not being their target audience, because I don't think that you could make this work effectively in a kids movie. But if the difficult relationship between Giselle and Morgan had arisen more from organic sources, and by that I mean their own inherent personality conflict that you can see from the beginning, as opposed to needing to put Giselle under a spell that transforms her into the stereotypical wicked stepmother, I would have preferred it to be a little bit more nuanced and a little bit more just based on the fact that they're not getting along very well at that point in time, rather than being like that she's not in control of her actions. Obviously, the whole level of flamboyantly evil would have needed to be toned down a lot to just more misunderstandings and disagreements. But I just found it a little bit dissatisfying that she wasn't acting of her own free will and was just under a spell, and I don't know, it just undermined something about it a little bit, which, again, I don't know if you could do what I'm describing in a kids movie and have it have a happy ending where the whole family is reconciled and lives happily ever after. So for purposes of what they were going for, it was fine. Like with the original Enchanted movie, there were a ton of references to classic Disney fairy tale movies like Cinderella, Snow White, and Beauty and the Beast. Those were the main ones that I noticed. Cinderella, obviously, with the talking animals and everything. Beauty and the Beast with the enchanted silverware and kitchen appliances. And I also thought that Morgan's song, where she's like singing about what she wants out of life, reminded me a lot of Belle's song from the beginning of Beauty and the Beast. And then the evil queen character was obviously very strongly Snow White inspired, even though there was no use of a poisoned apple, although there was a brief appearance of a poisoned apple, and she didn't personally have a stepdaughter. Still, just her whole aesthetic and the fact that she had a magic mirror, it very much felt like straight out of Snow White. Actually, I take that back. It didn't feel like it was straight out of the Disney Snow White. It felt like it came straight out of Once Upon a Time. If you're not familiar, Once Upon a Time was a TV show that ran for 7 seasons during the 20-teens and centered around fairy tale characters in the modern world. Now, that premise on its own is very, very similar to Enchanted, but there wasn't a huge amount of similarity that I can remember between the first Enchanted movie and the show Once Upon a Time, whereas here it felt like there were a lot of references to it. For instance, the town that they moved to, Monroeville, seems a lot like Storybrooke. It has the clock tower, it has the evil queen character who totally runs the show and no one really kind of understands why. It has the vines creeping up from out of wells and bursting through streets and whatnot, destroying the town, which is very much how the ending of Once Upon a Time Season 2 went. Even just the idea of small town in the real world where fairy tales are real, that on its own is very similar to Storybrooke from Once Upon a Time, but then just the details build up so much. I guess that makes sense because Once Upon a Time aired on ABC, which is a Disney-owned TV channel, and Disenchanted was a movie released on Disney+, so I don't really mind. I do think that I would have found it a little bit more interesting if I wasn't constantly thinking, oh, that reminds me of something from this TV show I used to watch, as opposed to, like, it being something that I hadn't seen done before. But, you know, it was fine. As far as the ending and how everything is put right, I found one part of it to be really clever and the other part to be kind of predictable, but still pretty sweet. The whole thing with the wand only working for a true daughter of Andalasia and Morgan being able to use it because she's Giselle's daughter, even though she's her stepdaughter because they see each other as mother and daughter, like, it was so predictable. In my notes, I wrote down, like, where was it? When Malvina Monroe fails to use the wand, when it doesn't work for her and she finds out it's because she's not a daughter of Andalasia, I figured out then that Morgan would be able to use it to put things right because of her relationship to Giselle, proving that them not being biological mother and daughter wasn't really important as far as being a true mother and daughter. So the two of them reconciling and acknowledging each other as mother and daughter, and Morgan using the wand to put everything right, that didn't surprise me in the least, and I thought it was a little bit cheesy, but it is kind of sweet, and again, this is a kid's movie. The other part of the ending, the part that I thought was really cool and inventive, was the idea that when the clock strikes midnight, the wish that led to all of this chaos can't be undone, and so two of the characters physically preventing the clock from striking midnight. It gave two characters who had a more peripheral role in the core emotional conflict of the story something useful to do while Giselle and Morgan were reconciling, and it also made use of an idea that, like, I don't think I've ever seen anything done like that before, like the whole Cinderella when the clock strikes midnight the spell will be broken thing. I don't think I've ever seen it gone at from the point of view of, like, the clock itself, the literal clock, as opposed to the time. So I really loved that, and I thought that it was a very creative solution. Admittedly, I did find the music to be a little bit grating. None of the songs really were memorable at all, and a lot of them just kinda got on my nerves, which I think some of the early ones are meant to, actually. I hope they're meant to, because where Giselle just randomly starts singing and Morgan is like, yeah, I'm right there with her. I have good memories of the songs from the first Enchanted movie, but these ones really didn't measure up in my opinion, so that was a little bit of a letdown. I thought the overall message, though, of once you find happiness in life, that doesn't mean that you'll always be happy every day for the rest of your life, but it means that you found something worthwhile, and that even as life changes, you'll be able to continue to find happiness, sometimes in different ways or in different situations. I thought that that was a really nice ending and an interesting alternative to the idea of happily ever after means happy every day for the rest of your life, which is frankly kind of unrealistic. In any case, I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you liked it and you want to see more from me, be sure to subscribe. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday.